This is a LibriVox recording. All the LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Peter Yearsley. Domestic Cookery, Useful Recipes and Hints to Young Housekeepers by Elizabeth E. Lee. Section 6. Bread, etc. As bread is the most important article of food, great care is necessary in making it, and much judgment, as the weather changes so often. In warm weather the rising should be mixed with water nearly cold. If there should be a spell of damp weather in the summer, have it slightly warm and set it to rise on a table in the kitchen. In winter it should be mixed with warm water, and left on the warm hearth all night. If the yeast is fresh, a small quantity will do. If several weeks old, it will take more. If you use dry yeast, let it soak 15 minutes, and put in a teaspoonful of saleratus to prevent it from getting sour. Light bread, baking in a stove, etc. For 2 loaves of bread, thicken a quart of water with flour till it will just pour easily. Put in a tablespoonful of salt and half a teacup of yeast. This should be done in the evening. If the weather is cold, set it where it will be warm all night, but if warm, it will rise on a table in the kitchen. If it should not be light in the morning, and the water settles on the top, stir in a little more yeast, and set it in a pan of hot water for a few minutes. Knead in flour till it is nearly as stiff as pie crust, and let it rise again. Have your baking pans greased, and when it is light, mould out the bread, and put it in them. Set it by the fire, covered with a cloth, till it begins to crack on the top, when it is light enough to bake. To bake in a stove requires care to turn it frequently. If it browns too fast at first, leave the door open a little while. A thick loaf will bake in an hour, and a small one in less time. In trying the heat of a stove, drop a few drops of water on the top. If it boils gently, it is in good order, and the heat should be kept at this point. To bake a Dutch oven loaf. If you wish to make a large loaf, it will take 3 pints of water, more than half a teacup of yeast, and 2 spoonsful of salt. When the rising is light, knead it up. Have the Dutch oven greased. Put it in, and set it near the fire, but not so near that it will scald. When it rises so as to crack on the top, set the oven on coals. Have the lid hot. Cut the loaf slightly across the top, dividing it in 4. Stick it with a fork, and put the lid on. When it is on a few minutes, see that it does not bake too fast. It should have but little heat at the bottom, and the coals on the top should be renewed frequently. Turn the oven round occasionally. If baked slowly, it will take an hour and a half. When done, wrap it in a large cloth till it gets cold. To bake in a brick oven. If you have a large family, or board the labourers of a farm, it is necessary to have a brick oven, so as to bake but twice a week, and to persons that understand the management of them, it is much the easiest way. If you arrange everything with judgment, 6 loaves of bread, as many pies or puddings, rusk, rolls, or biscuit, may be baked at the same time. Some persons knead up their bread overnight in winter. To do this, the sponge should be made up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. If you wish to put corn flour in your bread, scald 1 quart of it to 6 loaves, and work it in the flour that you are going to stir in the rising. To make 6 loaves of bread, you should have 3 quarts of water and a teacup of yeast. Scalded corn flour, or boiled mashed potatoes, assists bread to rise very much in cold weather. Have a quart of potatoes well boiled and rolled fine with a rolling pin on your cake board. Mix them well in the rising after it is light. If the oven is not ready, move the bread to a cool place. If the bread is sour before you mould it out, mix a heaped teaspoon of salaeratus in a little water, spread out the bread on the board, dust a little flour on it, and spread the salaeratus and water over, and work it well through. This quite takes away the sour taste, but if the bread is made of good lively yeast it seldom requires it. Let it rise in the pans about half an hour. Many persons that make their own bread are in the constant practice of using salaeratus, putting in the rising for 6 loaves a heaped teaspoonful dissolved in a little warm water. In this there is no disadvantage, and it ensures sweet bread, and it will also answer in making rolls or light cakes. Common sized loaves will bake in an hour in the brick oven. If they slip easily in the pans, and upon breaking a little piece from the side it rises from the pressure of the finger, it is done. But if it should not rise, put it back again. When the bread is taken out of the oven, wrap it in a cloth till quite cold. You should have a large tin vessel with holes in the top to keep bread in. In this way it will be moist at the end of the week in cool weather. Coarse brown flour, or middlings, makes very sweet light bread by putting in scalded cornmeal, say to 2 loaves half a pint, and is also good to use for breakfast made as buckwheat cakes. Directions for heating a brick oven, etc. It is very important to have good oven wood split fine, and the oven filled with it as soon as the baking is out. By this precaution it is always ready and dry. Early in the morning take out half of the wood and spread the remainder over the oven, in such a way as it will take fire easily. Light a few sticks in the fire and put them in. When it burns well, turn the wood about, and occasionally add more till it is all in. When it is burnt to coals, stir them about well with a long-handled shovel made for the purpose. When it looks bright on the top and sides, it is hot enough. Let the coals lay all over the bottom till near the time of putting in the bread, when draw them to the mouth, as it is apt to get cool the quickest. If you have biscuit to bake, put some of the coals on one side near the front, as they require a quick heat, and should be put in immediately after the coals are taken out. They will bake in 15 or 20 minutes. When all the coals are taken out, if the bottom of the oven sparkles, it is very hot, and should wait a few minutes. But if not, you may put in the bread first, and then the pies. If you have a plain rice pudding to bake, it should be put in the middle of the front, and have 2 or 3 shovels of coal put round it, if the oven is rather cool. Close the oven with a wooden stopper made to fit it. After they have been in a few minutes, see that they do not brown too fast. If so, keep the stopper down a little while. Pies made of green fruit will bake in 3/4 of an hour, but if the fruit has been stewed, half an hour will be long enough. Rusk or rolls take about half an hour to bake in a brick oven. If you should have to open the oven very often before the bread is done, put in a few shovels of coals and shut it up. When all is taken out, fill the oven with wood ready for the next baking. There is nothing in any department of cooking that gives more satisfaction to a young housekeeper than to have accomplished what is called a good baking. Graham bread. Take 6 quarts of unbolted flour, 1 teacup of good yeast, and 6 spoonsful of molasses. Mix them with a pint of milk, warm water, and a teaspoonful of salaeratus. Make a hole in the flour, and stir this mixture in it, till it is like batter. Then proceed as with fine flour. Mould it when light into 4 loaves. Have your oven hotter than for other bread, and bake it fully 1 hour and a half. It is an excellent article of diet for dyspeptic and sedentary persons. Dyspepsy bread. This is 3/4 unbolted flour, and the remaining 1/4 common flour, and is risen and made as other light bread, but should be baked rather more. Yeast. It is important to those that make their own bread to make their own yeast.